to come to Jacksonville in 2021. The Jags can't afford to have that happen again. They just can't be stingy. And I'll tell you why and how they can avoid that happening again on this edition of Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jags, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on? What's happening, man? Thank you guys for joining us here on Locked On Jaguars on a Thursday and making us your first listen. I am Tony Wiggins, your host of the Jacksonville Jaguars Locked On Jaguars daily podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And a reminder, we are free on all platforms wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for joining us again. Today, we're going to talk about these Jaguars and what they have to do in free agency. We're going to compare and contrast that to what they did last year in free agency. And what that was they took a very, very frugal approach. And I guess you can use the word frugal. But I'll warn you that frugal and stingy are identical twins, depending on what side you're looking at it from. The Jags got 13 free agents last year, and none of them were real big names. Most of them were infrastructure players, and they had that approach under Urban Meyer. And remember now, they had this, they were going to recruit guys, okay? That Urban wanted to talk to people and recruit them and have a chance to go out. And I'm going to say that word over and over again because it's so dumb. It was dumb back then, and I want you guys to realize exactly how bad of a mistake it was. But they said they were going to recruit guys. They wanted to talk to people. Right smack in the middle of all of the restrictions that happened during COVID-19, and there were very few face-to-face meetings, and people didn't really know Urban Meyer, and they ended up with some people that really did help them. Jamal Agnew really was a breath of fresh air as a returner and as a little bit of an offensive weapon before he was injured. Marvin Jones caught a lot of balls, and they had a few other players that really contributed. But for the most part, they didn't get a lot of bang for their buck after having way more salary cap room and space than anyone. The Jags are still at the very top, maybe not quite at the top, but in the top 3 or 4 in terms of salary cap space this year. So free agency comes before the draft. And before you can do a mock draft, an effective mock draft, you have to, especially if you're a bad team, you have to really, really worry about what a team is going to do in free agency and really concentrate on that before you can actually have an accurate depiction of what can actually happen in the draft. You have to understand what they first do in free agency. Like, for instance, if the Jaguars were to go out and sign Teron Armstead to a bunch of money, that would probably mean to tell you they're not going to take a left tackle, right? If the Jaguars already having Josh Allen decide to go out and sign Chandler Jones, that would give you an indication that they're either going to trade Josh Allen or they're probably not going to take an edge rusher. If they did both, what if the Jaguars signed an offensive lineman in free agency like Teron Armstead and Chandler Jones? Then that tells you they're either in the market to move back or they're probably going to either look to take Kyle Hamilton or maybe they take an offensive lineman that can probably play on the interior. Either way, free agency is going to tell you what they do in the draft. The approach to free agency will tell you how they're going to be or maybe give you an idea of what they're going to do in terms of trying to be successful in free agency. Trent Baalke said that they're going to be very, very aggressive. Now, we sort of heard Urban Meyer a year ago say that they were going to do the same thing and that there's going to be the best of the best and they're going to get the best of the best and then we're going to recruit and we're going to get the best of the best. You know what I'm saying. You get my point. And it never really came into fruition. And you saw within the first couple of days that things weren't going to go quite the way they were supposed to go when the top 2 tight ends on the market ended up on the same team in Foxborough. And you're like, we can't get one of the top 2 tight ends on the market with all of this money that we have? No, they couldn't. Here's what you'll have to learn about the NFL. There ain't no recruiting. You're going to talk to the guy's agent more than you're going to talk to the guy. Just a little hindsight. Malik Jackson flat out told me in the studio when he did our show when I was on radio that he never talked to Tom Coughlin or Dave Caldwell before he signed his 5-year, $85 million deal with $45 million guaranteed in the first 3 years to come to Jacksonville. His agent called him and said, this is what Jacksonville has on the table. And Malik said, take it. Never spoke with him. So to give you a little bit of behind the scenes of how ridiculous this whole recruiting thing is, here's what it is. Almost like college football. Actually, now if you think about it, if you want to pay attention to the rumors, here's how you recruit in the NFL. Show me that Skrilla. I want to see the cash. What do you got? What's your best offer? Take your best shot. That's how you recruit in the NFL. That's how you overcome a situation where a guy may not want to play for a certain type of coach, or a guy may want to have incentive to have amnesia about the recent, current, or long-time history of a bad franchise. You know how you do it? Dollar signs. That's how you do it. There's your recruiting pitch. That's your recruiting. That's it. That's it. In the NFL, that's your recruiting pitch. Now, that doesn't need to, or I don't want that to sound like I'm saying that these guys are just going to just be like a John or a Trick and just jump at the first thing that they see. No, it's all relative. If Team A has a great tradition and they're offering a whole boatload of money, and Team B has a great tradition or doesn't have, where they have a great tradition of being bad, and they have a great tradition of not doing well, if the money's relative or close, the guy will probably go to Team A because he probably wants to win. But when you're the Jaguars and you can do things for guys, and I'm going to talk about the specific people in just a second, and you can do things for guys that other people can't, you got to open that checkbook. You got to not be stingy. You can't even use the word frugal. In fact, to mock Eddie Murphy, if you even say any word that begins with FR, if you go, I'm going to punch you right in your face. We don't need to be frugal. I don't even want to be responsible when it comes to certain people in free agency. I don't. Some of them you just go get. Those players I'm talking about, Chandler Jones is one of them, but Devontae Adams is at the top of the list if he's going to be available. And if he's not available, then you move next to a guy like Mike Williams if he's available. If he's not available, then you move next to a guy like Chris Godwin if he's available. And the reason why I have Williams above Godwin is because Godwin's injured. That's the only reason. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you how Doug Pederson can help overcome whatever stigma that might exist from the sting of Trent Baalke still being the GM, and from the fact that the Jaguars have not been very good lately, to entice players to come here. I'm going to tell you in segment 2 because I really, really do believe that Doug's going to have a lot to do with that. So I'll give you that in just a second. But before I do that, I got to let you know about this. Football might be over this season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. Guys getting fired, guys are winning, teams having to win their tournaments in college to make sure that they get into the tournament. Is all the drama is about to start right now, and you want to be at the front of the line and get all the great information. And that's why you need to go to betonline.net, because it's #1 spot for all your sports betting needs, from the latest odds to totals to player performance props to where the teams are going to be in the tournament in college and where the seeds are going to be in the pros. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC. It's a great match coming up with two dudes that just can't stand each other. So you can put your money on that and get the right odds to those things that are happening this weekend. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at betonline.net. You want to do that because that's where the game starts. And your day hopefully starts here with us here on Locked On Jaguars, as we are your daily podcast, because it's your team every day and we're free on all platforms. Doug Pederson, I hinted at it just a second ago that Doug Pederson could be more than just a really, really good coach for the Jacksonville Jaguars with a proven pedigree. I love this answer, by the way. Somebody at the Combine from Philly asked him, are you going to do anything different this time? He said, what, besides winning another championship? And I love that, because it's like, we forget, Yeah, he might have got fired, but the dude won a title before he got fired. And he brought a championship to a place that had not won a championship in football in an awfully long time, or if ever. They had never won a Super Bowl. So we're hoping to have that same success here with Doug Pederson. And another thing that we're hoping is that his name brand, the fact that he was a former player, the fact that he's been around in some good situations and guys know him, and the fact that he won the Super Bowl on Front Street in front of everybody. Of course, everyone else wins on Front Street too, but that he had guys on his team that they seemed to play hard for him and they seemed to overachieve, i.e. Nick Foles. He was able to galvanize that team, and they adopted the identity in Philly of the fans and of the city, and they were able to take all of that and win a championship with it. Why is that important here? Was because there's a lot to overcome. In Jacksonville, they have a tradition of losing. Apathy has set in, of course, with the franchise, and folks just have a hard time believing that they're ever going to overcome their history and that they've been stuck where they've been stuck. So the first place to tell whether or not the Jags can make an indent into that past and start changing that is in free agency. You got to get players to come here, and you need players who have an immediate tremendous impact. It can't be status quo. That's why I mentioned names like Chandler Jones, and that's why I've mentioned, of course, Davante Adams. At one point, I thought there's no way the Packers are going to let Davante Adams hit the market because he's the best receiver in football. And then I thought that there was going to be some more uncertainty because of the Aaron Rodgers situation, which now, if you listen to people that know, it's trending that Aaron Rodgers is going to remain in Green Bay at a very high number. It's going to cause Green Bay to have to shift some stuff around. And folks are thinking that maybe Green Bay can't keep both Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams at those high numbers. Do the Packers want to franchise tag Davante Adams and make that number a little bit lower? And will that anger him to the point where he'll force them to give him a long-term contract? All of those things are unknown. I was at the point where I didn't think that there was a chance that somebody like that would come here because he's in his late 20s. He's going from an organization that has a tradition of competing. Why would you go to an organization that has a tradition that's the total opposite, where you're not competing? And then why at this stage of your career would you not go to a team that's a contender if you did leave Green Bay? I said it in segment one. Money. The Jags are in position to offer Davante Adams probably more money than any other team in the league if they structured the contract correctly. They could probably go out and be super, super aggressive and get 3 players. Now, if those 3 players are available, if I'm in the Jaguars organization, here's what I'm saying. Get me Davante Adams, get me Chandler Jones, and then after that, look at J.C. Jackson, and after that, maybe Dalton Schultz. The reason why I say that, and the only reason I'm leaving Teron Armstead out is because of injury history, but he's also a really, really good player. But the reason why I say that, I know some people want to stick Brandon Scherf into that group as well. I'm a little bit lukewarm on that, and I have my reasons for it. But, well, I'll tell you what the reasons are. I think he underachieved in Washington. And people say that, well, he's one of the best guards in the league. Okay, but the dude was picked as a top 5 pick, and he ain't Quentin Nelson. So you got to be real careful with that kind of stuff. So what I do think is that the fans would be happy if the Jaguars were able to get 3 impactful players. At some point, they have to have people on this team that are either the best at their position or in the top 5. And when you get guys on your team like that are either the best at their position or they're in that top 5, top 7, top 8 range, I think what happens is you start to legitimately give yourself a chance to win, and you allow the other players on the team to realize that when stuff gets tough, they got somebody that they can look at and say, okay, do something. Without that, then you're depending on scheme and a whole team full of dudes, and that doesn't work, and we see that it doesn't work with Jacksonville. So this is why I say they can't be stingy. They can't even think about being frugal. They can't even think about being – if you have a license to ever be irresponsible, this is one of them. Be irresponsible just once. Don't worry about cap. Just one time, just say, you know what, the hell with it. Because you have your franchise quarterback, and because even though they don't have a ton of great players, they don't have a ton of good players, they do have a lot of guys who, at the right numbers, can really add to the back end of your roster. So now what you need to do is you need to get those superstars. And unfortunately, they're going after other people's property, OPP, right? As opposed to having to retain their own. This is something else that Trent Baalke said. He says, we got to make sure we keep our own good players. Like, okay, he said two things this offseason that I agree with. The point is for me is, can he execute it? I think with his reputation that it's a little bit of detrimental in trying to get free agents. I do believe that Doug Pederson, with his reputation, can usurp that and help it a little bit. And it doesn't come as a surprise to me that Shots mentioned the other day that he's not going to get an EVP because he's seen what Doug Pederson has done in the building. Even if you guys don't believe it, and we've had that whole discussion yesterday, it starts to plant a seed that Pederson does have a big voice in the building, and he is the guy that's going to be making some decisions. And even Trent Baalke said, why would I not listen to him and get the things that he needs for this team? So it's starting to send this narrative out in a mustard seed form that Doug Pederson is in charge. He's running the show. It's a coach-centric team, and Trent Baalke is willing to listen. Now, whether or not that's true or not, we'll see. And what kind of impact that has on free agency and the draft, we'll see. But the message has been sort of pushed out there a little bit that Doug Pederson has. He's walking around with a big stick in the organization, and I said big stick in the organization, and is that he's going to be a guy that has a tremendous impact and a tremendous amount of say-so on what goes on in both the draft and free agency. So that is almost a message to agents. That's almost a message to the free agents themselves to sort of get over all of the noise and the things that you've heard about Trent Baalke, because his impact will be minimized when it comes to dealing with the ability to accrue talent and to get people to come play here in Jacksonville. So they got to not be stingy. They got to also put Doug Pederson, as the face of the guy that people want to come play for, as opposed to having Trent Baalke, the GM, be the guy as the face of the guy that people need to deal with in order to come be here in Jacksonville. Now, I got to let you guys know who some of the players are other than the guys that I've mentioned and why I've mentioned certain people. And the other thing is, you got to be real careful in the draft to not allow certain things to get in your way. Folks are emphasizing speed at the detriment, and speed is important, but it's at the detriment of getting good players. Sometimes you can focus so much on having a track team that you miss out on getting good players. What am I talking about? Well, the two best receivers in football, according to most people, are Devontae Adams, who I've mentioned, and Cooper Kupp. Both guys were not guys taken in the first round, and neither one of them really runs very fast. So you can almost outsmart yourself if you're Jacksonville. And the importance to not do that is extremely important, to not pay so much attention to these big numbers. And I'm going to get into more depth with that in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars on a Thursday. All right, rolling along here on Locked On Jaguars on a Thursday. I am your man, Tony Wiggins, here talking some draft, talking how the Jags can't be stingy. I'm also discussing what the Jaguars have to do in their approach in free agency and in the draft. Cooper Kupp, Super Bowl MVP, great player. Devontae Adams, considered the best in the league. Before that, it was D-Hop, considered the best in the league. And none of them are real fast. What does that tell you? You need guys that can win, not necessarily run. The Jaguars have to be extremely, extremely careful not to go cherry picking for explosiveness as opposed to really good football players. So everybody got all upset last year when Travis Etienne was picked in the draft because of his ability to be a home run player, because the Jaguars fans said, we already got a running back. I was right about the fact that they might take Etienne, and I said it leading up to the draft, and I said it on draft night, and then I sent a big picture of myself smirking when they did it because people didn't think they were going to do it. And I didn't necessarily think they should do it. I just listened to folks and listened to the things that they say, And Urban Meyer sounded like a guy who was going to do something like that. And I had heard rumblings that they could possibly do that. So this year, the idea is I think this is the year they probably need to take a running back, but they probably get one in free agency. And I'll tell you about that. I mean, this is the part where I tweeted out that y'all gonna get mad at me today. This is why, because nobody wants to hear about no damn running back. I'm gonna tell you why they got to get out of their own way when it comes to this athletic profile stuff. Everyone in the NFL knows, whether you talk about athletic profile or whether you talk about analytics or whatever, it's no secret that people want big, fast, strong people. People feel the more big, fast, strong people you have, you're going to be better. That's not rocket science here. I mean, there's nothing new. That didn't just be invented right now, right? But sometimes it's like when you overemphasize or when you lead with one thing too much, as the Jaguars have tended to do in their rhetoric and in their activity and their action over the last several years in the draft, it could get you in trouble. I.e., case in point, we're going to get a big running back. Everyone that keeps talking about Alvin Kamara and Dalvin Cook and Christian McCaffrey, that was never, ever, ever, ever happening under Tom Coughlin because he wanted a big running back. So if you want to get mad that the Jaguars took Fournette instead of taking Pig Howard or James Conner, then please, by all means, do that. But when you bring up the little guys, see, they already went in thinking that they were going to get a smaller dude. I mean, a bigger guy. And they weren't going to take a smaller guy. So that is not even about a talent evaluation. That is about out the gate, off the dribble, when you walk in the door, knowing that you're not only that you're looking for this, but if you're looking for that, you're not going to pay attention to that. People do the same thing with speed. They do the exact same thing with speed. I want a fast guy. So that means if I tell you not to think I want a fast guy, it doesn't mean I'm telling you to think I want a slow guy. It doesn't. What it says is I want a fast guy, but I'm not going to ignore this guy who can really, really play because he's not a burner. Now, I'm not going to go take a wide receiver that runs a 4.8 either. But if I want a dude that runs a sub 4.4, if I see a dude that runs he runs a 4.5, 4.6, I'm not going to ignore him if he's a really good football player, because I have this thing that I keep saying to people: if you don't draft him, you got to play against him. I can't get any more clear than that. This is the thing about the league: if you don't draft them, you got to play it. They don't just magically or mystically disappear. You don't draft them, you got to play against them. So you better make sure that you don't sacrifice a guy that's a real good football player because you're looking for this one characteristic and trait that he has if you're Jacksonville. Remember, don't be stingy. Allow Doug Pederson to be the face of the franchise. And the other thing is, make sure that you vet and don't pass up good football players that you have to play against. Now, let's get to the running backs real quick because I promise you I'd do it. Last year, when James Robinson, this time of year, James Robinson just come off of a very good rookie year as an undrafted free agent. People went through the roof. Certain people went through the roof when the Jaguars took Travis Etienne. I understand. When you're a bad team, why would you duplicate a position when you already have a guy? I totally get it. Look, I'm not arguing against that at all. But a little bit of that situation as it transpired, the part that makes it acceptable, notwithstanding, and I'll explain that. But the Jaguars now come into a situation where they have both running backs coming off of career-threatening injuries. This is the actual year that the Jaguars need a running back to make sure. You can't hinge your season on two guys that's coming back off of career-threatening injuries. The evidence that you can't do that is you thought you went in the last season with an abundance at that position, and neither one of them made it all the way through the season. The reason why it's more acceptable, though, to us is because it happened because of things beyond your control, which is injuries. It didn't happen because they just couldn't play. But the bottom line is it still happened. So at the end of the result, the net and the sum of all of that is still the same thing. That you're going into this season with two guys that are coming off of injury at a critical position, especially a critical position for Doug Pederson, where he used to run 2 and 3 different guys. So understand me, I am not advocating for them to take a running back in free agency or to trade for Saquon Barkley or to sign a running back in free agency, which I wouldn't do. That. That's crazy. A big money free agent. But what I am telling you is if you get your feelings out of the situation, you have to address the fact that, first of all, neither one of them are really big, so you have to make sure you have a goal line presence. Second of all, both are coming back from career-threatening injuries. So when you think about it and you go back, the only out of that draft, out of that pick, this is what I'll give the Jaguars. They did need explosiveness, and he was a very explosive player. All right. You need 2 running backs. I'll give them that too. The other part of it I'll give, and it's about 70-30 or 30-70 for me, is this. When you're a bad team, you can't cherry pick. You just need as many good players as you can get. And I thought Travis Etienne was one of them. One of the reasons you can't cherry pick is when they both end up getting hurt. See, if it would have been the reverse, they would have looked like a genius. If James Robinson would have gone down and Travis Etienne would have played the rest of the season and been a very good-looking player, then the fans would have been like, okay, it worked out. But the optics of it is, if you think about it like this, forget the history, forget where they drafted them, forget all of that stuff. If I told you that there was an NFL team whose top 2 running backs on their depth chart, one has an Achilles injury and the other one has a Liz Frank, and the Liz Frank injury, that guy has never really played very much, has barely played, and then the Achilles injury happened at the end of the season, you tell me, oh no, they need to find a running back. And then if I told you both of those guys were 210 pounds and you said, oh, they need a short yardage guy. So at some point, I'm telling you, they're going to address the running back position. Now, I don't know if it'll be, I know it won't be the first or second round, obviously. But I don't know if they'll sign somebody in free agency like James Conner or, I was thinking some names. I was looking around at the free agency list. I saw Leonard Fournette on there and I'm tripping because I'm like, what? No, they wouldn't do that, would they? They wouldn't do that, would they? Say we're going to have a 3-back rotation and you're going to be our big guy. They wouldn't dare do that, would they? I don't think so. But when you think back to Doug Pederson, he's always had the LeGarrette Blunts, the Pig Howards. He's always had, I think they had Chase Clemens, if I'm not mistaken. They've always had these guys. They've always had these rotational dudes. And if you look back at the Super Bowl that he played against New England, multiple guys scored, and they mixed in the run and the pass, even though Foles seems like he threw it 85 times in that game. So that's another position that at some point they're going to have to address. If you don't play them, if you don't draft them, you have to play against them. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Good players are going to go to other teams. Let's just take Buffalo, one of those teams that's in the way in the AFC, right? That's in the way in the AFC. If Buffalo gets either or both, let's just say Isaiah Spiller at the end of the at the end of the second round, and they double down and go Damian Pierce in the third round. That's a problem. That's a problem in the AFC. Imagine those 2 guys on the Bills. That's a problem. Imagine one of them on the Bills. That's a problem. So that's the good thing about being a good team is when you can fill a need like that without having to use premium resources. But when you're Jacksonville, you have to use resources on every single thing you can based on, the fact that you need a whole bunch of stuff, which is why, as we talked earlier, I hope they hit on big guys in free agency. We're talking about Devontae Adams, Mike Williams, Dalton Schultz, the tight end, Chandler Jones, J.C. Jackson. So I told you guys I'd say why I mentioned J.C. Jackson. I also mentioned Jesse Bates, who I think is going to get signed or franchised, the safety out of Cincinnati. I mentioned J.C. Jackson because of this. Do the Jags have a real number 1 corner? And if they do, is it Tyson Campbell? Who is the example of why don't get mad on draft night. Don't worry about losing the press conference after you make picks, because 3 weeks into the season, we were all, I say we, including me, down on Tyson. And now it looks like I'm sitting there saying, is he a number 1? And if he is, do you need a 1A on the other side of it? Also, You need a man-to-man shutdown guy. Also, you need a slot guy because these teams are in nickel most of the time. Also, you have a boatload of money. Also, at what point are you going to look around at your team and realize you don't have guys that are at the top of the league at their position, like I mentioned earlier, and you realize you need them. You need top heavy guys. You're not going to use it on a linebacker. If you do get a pass rusher, okay, you got more money. Okay, if you do get a wide receiver, okay, you got more money. Where are you going to use them at? You're not going to use it at running back. Some people might say guard. I say you can probably address that in the draft because the draft is full of them, and I don't think Brandon Scherf is that guy. Why not J.C. Jackson? Well, because we paid Shaq Griffin a bunch of money. So you got more money. Can Shaq play the slot? If you put J.C. outside, can you use Tyson Campbell in the slot like they talked about doing last year and allow him to come off the edge and blitz the quarterback? And also guard tight ends because he has size? You can't cherry pick if you're the Jaguars. You can't be stingy. You have to make sure that they know that they're coming to play for Doug Pederson. And if you don't draft them, if you don't sign them, you got to play against them. All of those things. Here's what I'm going to discuss with you guys tomorrow. Why there's no example of what the Jaguars are going to have to aim for and no model for who they should be. Everybody talks about Cincy. They're not Cincy. They don't have Jamar Chase right now, and they're not going to get a Jamar Chase this year unless they, of course, if they sign for it. But even if they, Cincy is a different situation because they hit on those first-round picks, starting with Joe Mixon, then with a couple of years later, Joe Burrow. Then they got Jamar Chase. So they really, and then they hit on their second-round picks with T. Higgins and guys like that. They already got Samaj Piran, who's their backup running back. They really, really hit on some guys. The Jaguars, while they have Trevor, they don't already have their Mixon. They don't have a chance to get a Chase this year in the draft. And even if, like, the Jags get Devontae Adams, that's still not the same thing because Devontae's a veteran. They got to pay a lot for. Chase is on a rookie deal, which frees up money for the Bengals to do other things. So there is no real other than the Jaguars just have to figure out their own identity. They have to do this their own way, and they have to carve their own way. And they have to be the team that other teams look and say, hey, look, we can do that, especially those teams that have been bad for a while. So we'll talk about that tomorrow, how they have to carve their own niche, how what they are doing isn't going to look like what anyone else is doing. Thanks for making Locked On Jags your first listen every day. Make sure you're following the Locked On NFL, Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NFL every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. Remember, it's free on all platforms. And also Locked On NFL Draft with Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker. They bring the NFL Draft to life every single day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's also free and available wherever you get your podcast. Man, until the next time we see you, which will be on tomorrow, you guys continue to take care of each other. And remember, don't be stingy. Make sure they see Doug Pederson's face more than they see Trent Baalke. And if you don't draft them or sign them, you're going to have to play against them and try to beat them. Till tomorrow, take care.